Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to give folks just one more minute to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Thanks for being here. Okay, hopefully everyone's been able to join, and we'll let folks continue to trickle in. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our latest in the Climate and Future Adaptations webinar series. My name is Lauren McDonald, and I'm the Climate Change Outreach Planner for the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And I'm really excited to be here today. Today's conversation will be about social equity and community collaboration. And we have a very knowledgeable and accomplished group of panelist speakers for you today. Before we dive into today's topic, I want to let you know about our next webinars that are coming up. There's one on September 19th and one on November 14th. So please mark your calendars for those. You can find details on these webinars as well as recordings from past webinars at the link provided. And the purpose of this series of webinars is to really provide local governments with the tools and resources and information you all need to tackle climate change in Colorado, with education on solutions and actions that can be taken to address climate change as we're seeing it in our state, with information on program and funding opportunities, and also with opportunities to collaborate and hopefully align with some of the state climate strategies and goals. And for our time together today, please go ahead and use the chat to communicate any questions or comments that you have to all attendees. Please use the Q&A function to communicate any questions that you have for the panelists. And your microphone is on mute during this time, so we can unmute you if you'd like to speak. So you can go ahead and raise your hand if that's the case. We also want to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Colorado Resiliency Office's website. And now I'd like to take a minute just to introduce you to our panel of speakers. Next slide, please. First, we'll have Rebecca Vigil with the Environmental Justice Program at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Rebecca is the Community Engagement Specialist there, and she'll be speaking about community engagement best practices. And then next we'll have Zara Al-Saloom, who is the Associate Program Manager for Transportation Fuels and Technology at the Colorado Energy Office. And Zara will be talking to us today about the state's electric vehicle equity study. And then finally, we'll have Beatriz Soto, Director of Protete for Conservation Colorado, and she will be talking about climate action and social equity in Colorado. Next slide, please. Much of the work you'll hear about today focuses on advancing environmental justice and climate equity. So we want to share the definition of environmental justice laid out by Colorado's Environmental Justice Act, just to provide some foundational information. So environmental justice recognizes that all people have a right to breathe clean air, drink clean water, participate freely in decisions that affect their environment, live free of dangerous levels of toxic pollution, experience equal protection of environmental policies, and share the benefits of a prosperous and vibrant pollution-free economy. We know that climate change impacts communities of color and lower income residents, and also communities who are already burdened by pollution more than other people living in Colorado. And we also know that policies and programs intended to address climate change can either improve equity and environmental justice, or they can contribute harm. In order to advance environmental justice, these solutions must be designed intentionally and with ample community input, because every community is different has different needs, assets, and ideas. And we're going to need everyone's input to contribute to the solutions for climate change and also to help us build a more resilient Colorado. So today you're just going to get a taste of some really exciting work happening in this space, but we want to let you know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you're interested, there's a lot more happening across Colorado and the region to advance climate equity and environmental justice. And we hope that today's webinar inspires you to dig deeper and explore what's out there, and also share the work that you might be doing in your communities with us. We would love to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca for our first presentation. I do want to let you all know that Rebecca needs to leave a little bit early today. So what we'll do is have her present and then pause for questions right after. And then we'll go ahead and have our final two presenters and have a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So Rebecca, you can go ahead and start your presentation when you're ready. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Rebecca Vigil, and I serve as the Environmental Justice Community Engagement Specialist for the Environmental Justice Program at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And while my role in this capacity spans only 1 year, my experience in community engagement and environmental justice has been cultivated over a decade. In a past role, I had the privilege to contribute to a work group that worked to define disproportionately impacted community, or DI, and I was part of a team that helped the EJ bill pass into legislation, and this was an achievement in our collective pursuit of environmental justice in Colorado. So an essential part of my work involves community engagement, and as we constantly seek to reinforce our relationships within our Colorado communities, a cornerstone of this engagement is nurturing trust and developing meaningful relationships geared toward community partnerships and environmental justice. So during this presentation, I'll provide insights on best practices for community engagement and in a broad EnviroScreen overview. My portion of today's session is scheduled for 15 minutes, and I plan to set aside the last portion for your questions after an 8-minute or so presentation. And so, yeah, I'll have to jump off the call, but I hope that, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I hope to hear from you. So here in the EJ program, my role extends to fostering and nurturing meaningful community collaborations and connections, especially in the DI communities that we serve. This goes beyond simply creating relationships. We aim to build trust, and that leads to meaningful engagement. The Environmental Justice Task Force was instrumental in our work. This task force devised numerous best practices for community engagement, and these best practices that I'm going to talk about are drawn directly from the task force recommendations, and they're brought to life in every event and meeting that the Environmental Justice Program is involved in. And I'll put a link to those best practices in the chat. So let's visualize community engagement in action. I think we could go to the next slide. Visualize community engagement in action. Imagine a meeting organized around the community schedule with varying times and days, from weekday lunches to evening gatherings and weekend meetings. Our goal here is to connect with communities where they are in both a metaphorical and literal sense. We strive to provide at least 30 days notice when a meeting could affect public health or the environment, particularly in DI communities. This gives everyone ample time to. So our outreach strategy, our outreach strategy is diverse and multifaceted. So we reach communities through a mix of text messages, organic and paid social media posts, flyers, phone calls, community announcement boards, newspapers, listservs, newsletters, brochures, fact sheets, personalized outreach, just to name a few. We also leverage digital platforms like websites and graphics, and use technology such as QR codes and web links to simplify access to our resources. Moreover, in our early planning stages, we partner with individuals and community connectors to help us understand a community's unique needs and concerns, and we compensate these connectors for their valuable insights, recognizing their crucial role in our work. We just actually wrapped up our pilot program with our community connector program, and it's on June 30th. And so we're gonna do that again this next year, and we're looking forward to that. So meeting locations, they're selected to provide a familiar setting, libraries, schools, local businesses, urban centers, and other rural locations. And we consider details such as accessibility via bike paths, public transportation, free parking, ADA accessibility, and childcare. Our goal is to create a safe, comfortable, and welcoming environment. And additionally, we prioritize clear, accessible communication. Our outreach materials, they're created to be easy to read and understand. We make them available in the two main languages of the community and inclusive and accessible to those with disabilities. So basically, we aim to simplify complex concepts and make our content easily digestible and shareable. And as we transition to the next slide, I'd like to draw your attention to a tool I've developed for effective outreach, the outreach and engagement template. This is a comprehensive 7-page document that serves as our game plan for every meeting and event. So it's not just a guide, but a commitment to these best practices. So in the next part of the presentation, I'll briefly touch on EnviroScreen, and I'll link it here in the chat. So EnviroScreen is our interactive environmental justice mapping tool. It combines metrics from 35 different environmental and socioeconomic indicators to identify DIC communities. We offer this tool at 3 geographical scales, including the most granular, the census blocks 4. So here's a map of the Colorado. The darker areas indicate a higher score. We provide different layers, mapping areas that meet the state definition of a DIC community. And we also offer additional layers for comparative analyses, such as the Federal Climate Economic Screening Tool. I'm most definitely not the subject matter expert on EnviroScreen. So for further questions about EnviroScreen, I'd recommend contacting Ronnie Kumar, the Environmental Justice Program Research and Policy Analyst. And I think her information is on the next slide. And so before I open the floor for questions, I want to provide you with this slide about the CDPHE's EJ program. And you can email this inbox for general information. And then here's also my personal contact. Just really would like to thank you for your time and for this space. And I look forward to your questions. And if we're not able to answer them today, I would love to hear from you. I do have to head to a community meeting right after this presentation. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Rebecca, for sharing that important information. If anyone has questions for Rebecca before she needs to take off, please go ahead and put it either in the Q&A function or by using the chat, and we'll give just a moment. And if not, you've got her information and can email her if you think of something after the fact. All right, Rebecca, we're going to send you on your way. Travel safely, and thanks so much for being here today. Next, we've got Zara Al-Saloom, Associate Program Manager for Transportation, Fuels, and Technology at the Colorado Energy Office. And Zara's going to share some information about the electric vehicle equity study that was recently wrapped up at the state. Welcome, Zara.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. We'll share my screen just, for some demonstration later, but about, the Colorado Energy Office, if you're not familiar, we are a branch of the governor's office. Overall, our goal in the Energy Office is to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions statewide. Transportation emissions is the largest factor in this. And so, how we think about transportation is going to be really critical in this push to reduce our emissions in the next decade or so. As part of that, we do have a goal of reaching 940,000 electric vehicles by 2030. Through that, we do various programming in terms of infrastructure and higher emitting vehicle programs like the vehicle exchange program that will be launching later this year. But in that programming, we really do have to take equity into consideration because there are folks that are just not ready for this transition. So we have to think about, well, how do we get them ready and meet them where we're at? So the EV equity study was created as a set of recommendations for the state in terms of state agencies, for municipal governments. And it really helps, ensure that the benefits of electric vehicles, as well as other forms of electric mobility, are reached by all residents of Colorado and that they see those benefits. And so this study does a good job of identifying current barriers to EV access, as well as identify opportunities for equity-centered approaches to electrification and stakeholder engagement. And so aside from stakeholder engagement, other sets of recommendations include, for programming, including more prioritized scoring for communities that are disproportionately or DI in better communities. And so we do use the definition of House Bill 21-1266, but since then we've had new legislation that's rolled out this year, and it really does help consolidate what our office and what other state agencies are doing into a consistent language. But the study uses that definition. But in terms of how we define EV equity, it is framed rather broadly in this study because not one community is the same. Rebecca framed it very well. Every community has different needs and they have different histories, especially when it comes to transportation and transportation electrification. So this study does, very well in highlighting and summarizing, how we meet communities where they're at. Next slide, please. And so through that study, we created 2 tools that I found quite useful. And, we have so many tools in the state, but it's great to, use them and, it as a complement to each other. And so one of those tools is the EV Equity Dashboard. This is a landing page that shows trends on a year-by-year basis, as well as the locations of, where investments have been made to date through state funding. And this was done, through our 3 electrification programs. So Charge Ahead Colorado, the Corridors program, and there's one more that I'm fortunately forgetting, but this tool provides 8 different views of, how to look at transportation electrification in the state. And so one of those is socioeconomic, which is incredibly helpful because it does highlight Block groups that have a share of people of color, people with disabilities, limited English proficiency. If you're looking at the new legislation, it does talk about linguistic isolation, which is fantastic. That's very needed. This layer also looks at cost burden households, overcrowded households, households in poverty, as well as employment and current transportation habits, such as carpooling or households that have no vehicles. And we also look at health. We look at this data by county and block group, as well as vehicle registrations, any existing electric vehicle supply infrastructure equipment, as well as vehicle miles traveled, and the utilities. And so next slide, please. This will be a relatively fast presentation, actually. The next tool, this is probably my favorite tool that I've used. It's the EV prioritization tool. This is a rapid prototyping tool that is created with Excel spreadsheets. So it's a raw data set. It is quite robust. It uses data from Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, as well as Department of Transportation and census data. And so this data is looked at by census tract. And it uses various indicators that can be weighted depending on program needs and targets. So for example, if I'm trying to create an e-bike program, I can look at micromobility and e-bikes, and I want equity to be a very big component of that program. So I weight it at 30%, while all other weights are lower or scored to what makes sense for that program. It also helps forecast funding opportunities and priority areas, and it really just gives you a number in terms of this is a priority area, and this is a community that is disproportionately impacted and provides a score. We often talk about the qualitative side of which is citizen science is very critical to what we do. Having numbers also does help back that up. So happy to share those tools. I will note for the prioritization tool, you do need to be up to date with the most current version of Excel spreadsheets. It is a very hefty tool, so just make sure that is in place before you download it. And yeah, we'll hand it off to Lauren. So.
Thanks so much, Zara. And you are going to be able to put links in the chat for folks asking. Wonderful. All right. And last but certainly not least, we have Beatriz Soto, with the Director of Protégete with Conservation Colorado. Excited to have you here today, and go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Yeah, so Protégete also embarked in kind of a data collection exercise, and we published the policy handbook with some disaggregated data specifically impacting Latinos and in the state of Colorado, and then some policy solutions that might help address some of these issues. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Protégete is part of Conservation Colorado, and we are one of the largest environmental advocate organizations, and we work with community to elevate community issues and connect them with policymakers, with different agencies, and make sure that the community is helping shape the future of environmental and climate policy moving forward. As I mentioned, we're an initiative from Conservation Colorado, and our intent is to really build power alongside community, and then also support community leaders with the resources that they need to really engage on these issues. Because a lot of times when community does not have the knowledge or the baseline of information to be able to participate, it makes it really hard for community to participate fully, and then obviously we also mobilize and advocate alongside community for the interest of different communities. Can we go to the next one, please? So a big component of our effort was to work with the Doctora Nikki Gonzalez and make sure that we're putting the historical context into perspective as well. We know a lot of the current environmental issues that we are facing, or the lack of community participation, or the lack of community leadership in these different decision-making bodies is by design. It is not just happen because it happens this way. It was very much created, and the systems as they are currently working were established a certain way. They were designed to do what they do. But unfortunately, the reality is that we're missing out a lot of leadership opportunities. Like the Doctora Nikki has highlighted, Latinos in Colorado were one of the first ones to draft how we should be managing the land and stewardship ideas and put those forward. They were created in Spanish, and a lot of these values and ideas have been lost. They were very much rooted in Indigenous knowledge. So what we're really trying to do is make sure that that conservation history is preserved, and that the Latino community really sees themselves as conservation leaders. So when we started our exercise, what we wanted to understand is, where is the Latino community? Who is the Latino community in Colorado? We are not a monolith. We have communities that live in urban areas and rural areas, and we wanted to come down to a common denominator to really see how, communities that lack political power and have high Latino populations, how resilient are they in the face of climate change, and how much leadership really matters in this context. So basically what we did is we identified what a high Latino county is and what a low Latino county is. And what we used as a metric is that the standard population of Latinos in the state of Colorado is 20%. So any community that is above 25% or below 15%, we considered a high Latino county or a low Latino county. And then we compared apples to apples, right? To really understand access to vehicles, rooftop solar panels in their homes, age of homes, where is their water source? We asked a whole bunch of different questions based on the priority issues that we work on, which is climate, transportation, housing, communities in health, water, and public lands. So you'll see that some of these communities, despite not having huge populations, they have a lot of Latino representation. And we can see it, like, for example, on this scale, that Costilla, Rio Blanco, different communities that they might not be super high in population have a lot of percentages of Latinos. And when we think about the Latino community, we really want to think, yes, the Denver metro area, but also outside of that Denver metro area, what do those demographics look like? So in the intent of really making this comprehensive tool, we had kind of in mind who we were designing for, and we were designing for policymakers, for local governments, but also for community. A lot of times this information can get really technical or wonky, and what we wanted to make sure that we were conveying via maps and graphics is something that's really easy to grasp and understand at first sight. So here we can see a map of where are those high Latino counties across the state of Colorado. And then we're going to overlap those same maps with social vulnerability, with climate pollution, with impaired waterways, with parks and access to green areas, with extreme heat, and really try to get a comprehensive understanding of the reality of Latinos in the face of climate change in our current day and age. So this map really helps us identify where all those high Latino counties are. So all the ones in dark blue are the ones that are above 50% Latino, and the light blue, and then the dark blue are above between 25 and 50%. And then we kind of put in pink what we consider to be isolated communities that really lack political power or the ability to kind of engage with communities around them to create more power for change and advocate for their needs. So as I mentioned, one of the things that we really looked at is looking at the energy, climate crisis and energy and how that overlaps, the climate crisis in housing and also transportation. This was really important to us because, as they just mentioned previously, all of these issues overlap in terms of our ability to adapt to a changing climate and create programs that really meet community where they are, kind of beyond just like the engagement part, but really is like, what is the reality of the community and how can we create programs to change that reality moving forward? Or also capitalize and take opportunities alongside those communities. So we mapped where all the climate pollution is across the state of Colorado. These are landfills, these are oil and gas extraction. This is also water treatment facilities. So we just really wanted to understand where is the concentration of all these facilities across the state of Colorado. And again, what we were really trying to convey to community and to really, see how we prioritize our work and our organizing and our capacity building is like, where should we be doing this? Is Denver the hub of everything that we should be doing, or should we really be looking at Latinos across the state of Colorado? And then we can really start to see patterns, right, of where the Latino community is located and where we're seeing these like high, the sacrifice zones, right? That's exactly what we call them. We know exactly where the sacrifice zones are in Colorado and where our efforts should be directed. And this is an effort that we did alongside the Enviro screen. So it was all kind of happening at the same time. Obviously, we were looking at it from a very Latino lens specifically, because that's really our mission is to elevate Latino-driven climate, water, and land solutions. So again, we can just start to see, especially in the southern part of the state, we can see those big, dense areas of climate pollution. And then on par, the other thing that we're really looking at too is political power, right? Who is making the decisions in these communities? Is it the Latino community, or does the Latino community really lack political power to dictate, what type of industry, what type of future they want in their communities? And what we're also finding is a correlation with community having very little power. And that's why these communities end up being sacrificed, right? Because of that lack of civic engagement, that lack of representation of the Latino community. It's overly represented in these particular areas of the state. So when we think about the climate crisis and adapting to climate change from the built environment and from housing, something that we really also wanted to understand is who is energy secure, who is energy insecure in our state, and then also what type of housing does the Latino community live in. So what we really found is that 1 in every 5 households is a mobile home. For the Latino community, that's huge, right? 20% of all Latino home ownership is a mobile home park. And what we don't see is a lot of programs directly designed for that type of housing, when we know that these homes use 65% more energy than framed house. Even though they're small, this is the type of little pockets where the Latino community is, that a lot of time by the programming that we create, it gets overlooked and it's not a high priority to help us meet our goals. So this is really important. The other thing that we also found is that high Latino counties have a lot less solar top. Rooftop solar. So what we're seeing is that the benefits of our collective efforts to start to have clean energy directly on site isn't necessarily benefiting Latinos, right? They are not benefiting from those tax incentives. So I think it really poses the question is like, how can we design programming that will really benefit across the board and that will make sure that our programming is targeted community at the same rate, right? I'm not saying to take, what does it take from Paul to give to Peter? It's not about that, but it's about creating systems that actually capture the diversity of Colorado, the diverse type of housing, and that when we're looking at who benefits, you can see, you know, a very robust and shared benefit across ethnic groups, across cultural groups, across languages, across urban and rural, right? So all of this, we just want to make sure that we are benefiting everybody and that everybody is being brought along in the programming and the solutions that we are crafting. Otherwise, it means that we're really not creating solutions that are serving everybody. And this is just really an analysis to get to the gist of that and to start creating the programming that will truly benefit people regardless of, you know, their language or however they identify. Can we go to the next slide, please? When we were looking at the housing, what we were also finding is that when we look at people that are homeless in the state of Colorado, especially families that are homeless, are overrepresented by the Latino community. We can see that 53% of Latino families with children, that is a representation of families that are homeless versus 28% that are non-Latino, when our population numbers aren't necessarily the same. So we're seeing twice as much. And when we think about solutions, heating centers, cooling centers, programs that put people in homes, and especially in the face of climate change, it is imperative that we really tackle this number and we bring it down. So Latino families are housed and have a safe place to live, especially in the face of more extreme weather. The other thing that we really understood is that Latinos represent a very, very, very high number of renters. So again, we really have to think about what does it mean to have a just transition for all types of renting types of buildings, right? May they be apartment complexes, affordable housing, single family homes that are rented. What does it really look to push that market to have access to clean energy? Can we go to the next one as well? Then when we really looked at transportation, we started to see that the Latino community particularly drives older vehicles, which we all know use more gasoline, are less efficient, and then also tend to need more repair. So one thing that we've been really thinking about is who is the carpooling efforts that we've created, who is benefiting from that, who is using these carpool infrastructure that is paid by taxpayers, right, at the end of the day, and is it really benefiting everybody across the board? And what we're seeing is no, it isn't necessarily benefiting. And we're also seeing, you know, who is the one which groups consume more gasoline, which groups consume less gasoline, what type of vehicles are we driving? And then also, where are all the highways? I mean, this is like really impressive to see that high Latino counties that we saw in the map, we mapped out how that looks. We are carrying the burden of 70% of the highways, right? Despite being only 35% of the counties in being high Latino counties. So then we're also seeing how design and how the planning of cities and highways, who is it really impacting when we have to sacrifice or we have to give up, certain things, certain perks, right, for having highways and roads in certain communities. And like we just saw in the climate pollution map, that's oil and gas. Now we're also overlapping a lot more amount of highways in those same communities. And that's where that concept of environmental justice really comes in. And we're going to see water and parks and other things too, but you can really start to see a stark difference of where we're the cumulative impacts and where we're starting to really sacrifice certain communities and certain ecosystems within our state. And we have a great opportunity, right, to not repeat the errors of the past and create a more just future and a state that is holistically adaptable to climate change. One thing that was really important to us too is really identifying those communities that have social vulnerabilities, that the safety nets don't catch them in the same way. And I think we really saw it during COVID, right? Which communities got more impacted. I can give an example of my community. We're 35% of the community and 70% of the COVID cases, right? So there was a really stark eye-opening moment when we realized which communities are most socially vulnerable and cannot adapt as quickly to something like a pandemic. And when we think about climate change, it's going to be something very similar. And we have to start to build those safety nets within those communities. All those communities that we see in that dark red and the purple and the darker pink, those are the communities that are considered socially vulnerable. And then we overlay with, again, those high Latino areas, we start to see, again, a lot of overlap, that we're overburdening community with industry, pollution, roads. They're living in smaller households and mobile home parks. And then at the same time, a lot of these communities are going to be the ones that suffer the worst impacts of climate change. Can we go to the next one, please? So a lot of our work, the way we really see it is through the lens of community and the lens of justice. So we really want to understand, what does the demographic also look in our community? A huge part of our community are children. And a lot of times when we're thinking about policy, or we don't necessarily think about the elderly or how children will adapt. When we think about benchmarks of pollution, how much pollution can a body receive? A lot of those studies are done in adults. They aren't necessarily done in children. So then again, we go back to that factor of like which communities are being sacrificed across the state. And when you have such large populations of children and you have a lot of oil and gas, a lot of highways, a lot of impaired waterways, and all of it, and lack of access to natural spaces onto this very specific demographic, the side effects or the long-term effects can be very catastrophic for their whole life. Can we go to the next slide, please? Again, just really looking at poverty levels, really understanding how that looks. We even looked at pregnancies. We went even further to really try to understand stillbirths and really what does it look like from a health equity standpoint to really be able to adapt to a changing climate. Can we go to the next? Pay wages. We really did do a pretty comprehensive look at all of this. The other thing that we were also really like trying to understand is access to information and broadband and technology. When we rely so heavily on certain technological aspects of our lives to get to communities, and some communities don't necessarily have that same amount of access, it makes it really hard for community to engage. And again, we're replicating systems where we're leaving certain people behind. And historically, we have left BIPOC, Indigenous, Black, Latino communities behind. And we want to make sure that moving forward, that's not the case, and that we are starting to address a lot of these issues. Can we go to the next slide? So another thing that was really important too is understanding where does our community work, right? What does it really mean for our community to adapt? A lot of times the people that are crafting the solutions are, blue collar, high educated jobs. They work in an office, and not necessarily are the people that work in construction and warehouses. They're not the ones creating the policies to adapt for climate change. And this was really starking, right? When you see that 82% of representation of people that work in transportation and warehouses are Latinos. Again, what is the policy that we're making to ensure that warehouses are actually resilient to heat, that community has the right information? What does a heat stroke feel like? how do they adapt? We also have a very large proportion of representation in the construction fields, in the landscape fields, oil and gas, agriculture, forestry, all of that. So we're highly represented in outdoor jobs. Even when we think about things like ozone pollution and bad air quality, not everybody can really have the luxury. I don't know if you've seen the signs, but you'll see do not exercise outside today. Well, that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. There might be people that are actually exercising, riding their bike, but there's actually people that are working outside, and they might not have the luxury to say, oh, I cannot work for 65 days out of the year that are bad ozone days or are we going to create programs that compensate their salary so they can stay indoors and stay healthy as a group of people? That's important, right? And they're vital to our economy. They're vital to our society. And I think with COVID, we really came to understand a lot of these workers are essential workers. And for us to have a society that's fully functioning, we really need that labor workforce, and we need them to be healthy. And we are not willing to sacrifice them any longer. Can we go to the next slide, please? So just kind of jumping. So I'm just kind of jumping on different issues here. But the other thing that we really looked at and we were really concerned about is water justice. We had heard for many, many years that community was expressing the concern about not having access to clean water directly from their tap and having to pay up to 300% more for water in plastic bottles. That is not only contributing to plastic pollution, but it's also really impacting people's economy. There's communities that have to make a choice between buying water, buying food, or going to the doctor. And we really believe that in the state of Colorado, within the United States, everybody should have access to clean water from their tap, at least to cook. So we were really trying to map out where are all these impaired waterways, what does this mean for the Latino community, really also wanting to understand in the face of climate change, which communities are most vulnerable to flooding. So when we're thinking about social equity in terms of being resilient in the face of a natural disaster, making sure that these communities are prepared. They understand, what their risks are. They understand where to go. They understand who to call. They have a bag ready, with their most important information or things that they really care about, and they're able to move quickly, and that we don't see the loss of lives. And that community is also, again, prepared with the right type of home insurance, and are participating in the solutions of evacuation orders. What we've seen in a lot of our communities too is that these evacuation orders sometimes are not even in multiple languages. So it's really important as we're thinking about adapting to a changing climate and more extreme weather events, that our community is resilient and ready to move, to adapt, whatever it takes to keep everybody safe. So what was really fascinating when we did this study is that, as I showed in the climate pollution map, we're seeing a lot more radius of oil and gas and operations in certain parts of the state. And what's fascinating is that when you start looking at the water sources of these communities in those same areas, we start to realize that the Latino community is heavily dependent on well water, which is a little bit different than other communities that just have more infrastructure. And a lot of times we had a really hard time finding information on wells. How old are they? What materials are they made out of? And then how often are they tested for PFAS, emerging pollutants? Because we continue to hear from our community, they don't trust their water, something's wrong with their water. We actually polled community, and 1 in every 3 Latinos does not trust or drink the water from their faucet. But there's probably a reason for that, right? 88% of all water violations are in high Latino counties. And this is information from the EPA and from CDPHE, right? We're really tracking where these violations are and overlapping those with those high Latino counties. Next slide, please. And I have a lot of information, and I'll put the link into all of this. And we can probably skip these really quickly because I'm running out of time, but we mapped drought, access to parks, how many kids per park can we go to? Yeah. To really, with America the Beautiful, the state conservation plan, we really want to make sure that Latino communities are benefiting from this historic investments in making sure that part of our resilience is access to natural spaces, and nature-based solutions are actually, absolutely essential in our communities and something that's very much needed moving forward. Can we go to the next slide? Next one, please. So how we've been wanting to solve this, and I just want to share a little bit about our work, is we created a Climate Justice Leadership Academy. Can we go to the next slide? And what we're really focusing on is developing the Latino community to serve on boards and commissions, to be ambassadors for their community and really know and understand the environmental issues in their community so that they can bring that community, that information back to their own community. And we have a set of programming focused on youth. We have a set of programming focused on adults. And then we're also focusing on boards and commissions, may they be at a local, state, and federal level. And then also having more of our community really stepping up to serve and represent their communities. May they be on a school board, may it be as a county commission at a local level, but just really having that diversity of leadership in the representation of these communities so we can start to tackle some of those discrepancies that we're seeing, right, in those sacrifice zones in the state of Colorado, and have those community voices with the lived experience really helping shape the policies moving forward in climate, in the face of a new climate reality, so we're not leaving behind any communities. So again, this just kind of shows a little bit of our work that we do alongside community, making sure that, they're at we're co-designing, right? We're co-designing our future, we're co-designing our resilience, we're co-designing our adaptation plans. Next slide, please. And again, just really empowering community to stand up and to start to change the reality of their lived experience to be something better for them, for their children, for their future. This is a great picture of Carla and her 2 children that lives in a mobile home park, right? That is a single mom and has really been fighting to have access to clean water and really, be resilient in the face of climate change, and all those amazing programs that we have benefit people in mobile home parks as well. Can we go to the next slide? And then again, when we talk about community representation and really starting to diversify the face of leadership in a lot of our spaces, thinking about people like Representative Elizabeth Velasco, that started with language justice and interpretation and jumped on to be a wildland firefighter. And now thanks to her, there's a whole study being done across the state to really identify the languages that communities speak. And so when we have wildfires, we can communicate and we can adapt, right? We can move quickly and be able that we're not leaving community behind, and that all messaging, emergency messaging is coming out at the same time in all the diverse languages of community. Can we go to the next slide, please? And well, that's it for me. And I appreciate your time. And I'm going to put the link to our policy handbook in the chat. And again, any questions, please feel free to ask.
Beatriz, thank you so much. That is such an amazing resource, a lot of complex problems, but such rich data to really help us understand some of the problems. And then the Academy, just so many exciting efforts going on. So thank you. I feel like we just got a hint of it, and there's probably a lot more there, and we could talk all day about it, and I would love to hear more. I want to invite everyone to put their questions. Lots of accolades in the chats for you, but questions for our speakers. I do see one. Jemmy, can you, I believe we'll be able to share the slide deck after the webinar. Is that true with everyone?
Yes, I just entered that. So it will be in the follow-up email, and it'll also be on the CRO website.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Any questions for our panelists? I have a couple. I can start, and then maybe we'll get the juices flowing to have more of a dialogue. I have a question for Beatriz, actually. So we're speaking to local governments today. So keeping that in mind and understanding that there's so many differences between kind of urban and rural communities and the challenges that they face, what 1 or 2 pieces of advice would you give to local governments and local partners who are trying to do a better job of communicating with Latino members of their communities about whether it's about like important resources like funding opportunities or rebates for things or things of that nature, or even life or death information like you were mentioning, whether it's, you know, natural disasters or extreme heat events, where to find a cooling shelter, that kind of information. Of course, there's making sure that it's available in lots of languages, but beyond that, are there things that you've been hearing, kind of channels that people receive their information, ways that people kind of look to information that they trust to know what's going on? Just a few tips that you might be able to share with our audience to help them find ways to do a better job at that.
Yeah, so something that government I felt did really well, or really advanced really quickly, is the communication with with different pockets of community during COVID. For all the COVID alerts, you know, mask, no mask, school, no school, vaccine, no vaccine, how to operate your businesses. I felt like local governments really pushed and had to like push themselves really hard to establish those relationships and those communications. I would say hold on to those relationships and hold on to those people, and you to continue to partner with those individuals that, you know, I feel like a lot of local governments have already identified because of COVID, and those are probably going to be your same best bet in terms of a natural disaster, and continue those building those relationships, right? Because a lot of these people are power brokers or community brokers, right? They kind of have one foot in multiple worlds and networks, and it's really important to really continue to build those relationships and communicate with community in the language that they speak, but not just translation, culturally, how they speak about these different issues, and tap into those different networks where community is really receiving their information. I know it sounds really corny, but it's like sometimes you reach a lot more people like via TikTok, via influencers in the community, WhatsApp, right? There's all these different channels, and that's where people live. And a lot of times we want to bring them onto email chains or the different ways of communicating. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just kind of have to join the flow of where our comunidad is, and just kind of just be like very intentional, right? Of making sure that we are relating in a way that community can really receive the information and in the words that they speak it. A lot of times just toning it down a little bit, making it less wonky, and really capitalizing on those public information officers and those community brokers, and investing in creating those community brokers across their government.
That's super helpful. Thank you. We have a question for you also from Grace Sullivan. Excellent presentation from all. Thank you, Beatrice, for your critical data. Does similar data for other demographics in Colorado exist, and how can we find it?
That's an excellent question. I haven't necessarily seen it. And you know, we've already been talking to some partners from the Black community and Indigenous community to see if, you know, maybe we just do a more comprehensive report and really start to disaggregate a lot of the data. Because even when we look at Latinos, they're different. We're not a monolith, and it's really important to recognize that as well. And we didn't go as far as doing that. We went off the census tract. And that obviously isn't a perfect metric to measure people. So there's definitely gaps there, but I haven't seen that. The closest that I've seen is the EnviroScreen, and CDPHE is doing a great job at really building up that tool.
My computer's moving really slowly, but I will drop that link in the chat before we go here. It doesn't break down the data also by specific demographics, unfortunately, by specific race or ethnicity, but it will help kind of outline a variety of different other demographics. So might be helpful to check out. Okay, I'm hopping back and forth from the chat to the Q&A. Daniela, wonderful presentation. Where can we find the study about the languages used in Colorado during emergencies such as wildfire? Is that something maybe you can share?
That is something that just passed this last legislative session. So I think it's going to take them a couple years. But again, it's funded, it's tasked. So I'm really hoping that it's going to come out, I think, in a couple years.
Okay, great. And Annie says, is there a space that local governments can connect on social justice and environmental equity throughout the year? And are there any coordinated benchmarks communities are guided to meet?
That's a great question. I know local governments and county governments have different associations, but I don't know if there's one specifically for social justice and social equity. I know there's counties and communities for climate action and really looking at policies that can help communities adapt to climate change. That might be a really good space to kind of start pushing some of those groups to be like, we need to make sure that environmental equity and climate social justice are a part of because I think they're members and they pay and they have a lobbyist and a policy researcher, but that's a good question. And I would really push those groups to make sure that they're covering those issues as well.
I think that's the one that comes to mind for me too. And they do focus a lot on equity and environmental justice, but I think there's a need there too. Sorry, I don't know if you have anything to add or something you're aware of that you want to share.
In terms of, sorry, in terms of Annie's question, I was also looking at another question in the Q&A.
Yep.
Not that I know of at this time, but.
We can move on to Amanda's question for you. Is the Energy Office working with utilities to make electric vehicle chargers more accessible?
Yes. So if any of you have been, watching with the utilities transportation electrification plans, the movement on that. So Xcel Energy is one that I know of. I'm not sure if we're working with Black Hills at this time, but they are in the process of updating their transportation electrification plans. And so part of that is our office, as well as I believe other state agencies are working rather closely with them on updating the equity offerings in terms of residential and commercial, and some part commercial, multifamily housing program offerings and rebates, as well as moving away from early adopters in terms of EV adoption and EV charging accessibility for single family homes. I believe that is what I know at this point. We actually had a really great presentation from both Xcel Energy and from Black Hills Energy at the Community Access Enterprise, which is housed under our office. I can send along the link to that, and we do have meeting minutes that'll be updated and shared next month, but we do have the recording and presentations that can touch on that better. But our office is working with them on what those updates will look like once they get those approved by the PUC.
Wonderful. And Zara, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I seem to remember there's also some pretty exciting rebates coming up, especially for low-income Coloradans, if they want to trade in kind of an older vehicle for possibly an electric vehicle. Do you have the link to that information, or do you happen to know anything you could share with folks?
Yeah, I can share the link. It's very exciting. So for those who remember, Cash for Clunkers, it's essentially pretty similar concept. It's called Vehicle Exchange Colorado. I believe it's launching not this month, maybe next month. But yeah, so this program will be targeting our low to moderate income communities. We will be using AMI, I believe, so area median income up to 80%. And that can't remember the name, or not the name, I can't remember the number we had reached in terms of that rebate, but it is stackable with any utility rebates, as well as state and federal tax credits. So yeah, I'll drop the link and please check it out. It's a great program. We're also launching our electric bike rebate next month. Also really exciting. Love micromobility. Honestly, that's the way to go, especially with all of our traffic congestion. So yeah, I will drop the links to both of those. We'll have more announcements on the e-bike rebate, but
fantastic.
More to come.
Thank you. And we have 1 more minute left, so I want to get to the last question if possible. How can we find accurate geospatial data to create our own equity and climate resiliency maps? I did drop the link to EnviroScreen in the chat, and I believe on that website you can find kind of downloadable data and or a contact who knows a lot more about it than I do. I also want to share the FACE hazards tool that was produced by the Department of Natural Resources, and it's county by county looking at kind of the economic impacts of climate change, whether it's fire, flood, drought, those types of things. So there might be something on there that would be useful to you. But if that doesn't do it, feel free to contact one of us at the state, and I'll try and get you the right information. I want to thank our speakers so much for their time and being here today and taking your questions. It was a really exciting discussion. And again, I feel like we're barely scratching the surface. I would love to have a 4-hour conversation about all these different efforts and hear more about what's happening at the local level. But we appreciate you being here today and look forward to continuing the conversation again in the future. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thanks.